Follow trawler. It's because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea. Thank you very much.
Talking nonsense. So I thought, no, enough's enough. Why should I put up with that? Talking nonsense. So I thought, no, enough's enough. Why should I put up with that? Don't back down, double down. Don't back down, double down.
Yes, here we go. 2.5 minutes of Richard Gordon's life we've already stolen from him with that intro. Welcome aboard the Bhoycie bus. And this is a first. This is going to be a new series that we try and do every now and then when we can manage to pull a guest in of some sort of repute. And we have now today delighted on the first show when the Bhoycie bus picked up. And it is the voice of Scottish football for the last 30 years, Mr. Richard Gordon. How you doing, mate?
I'm great, thanks. Thank you very much for the invite.
Ah, superb, Mark. We're excited about this one. You sourced the interview, mate. I'm just trying to drive the bus as we go along today, mate.
Oh, absolutely buzzing with this one. Richard's been a big part of Scottish football for somebody my age since I can remember, and I don't think our Saturdays would be the same since he left the BBC Saturday show. Well, we've not had one yet, but I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say about his new job and how he's enjoying being away for Tam Cowan and Stuart Cosgrove in the mornings this Saturday. That must be a relief for him.
Yeah, I would say that is a relief. I think I've put up with more than any man should have to put up with for all these years. But they're great. I mean, I actually love that little. I mean, it was supposed to be a 2-minute segment where I just trailed ahead to Sportsound, but it grew and grew and grew over the years. And I always felt I could say things during that 10, 15 minutes that I couldn't necessarily say in Sportsound. So I would get a wee bit more latitude every now and again. But no, I mean, they're great guys, and it was a big part of my life, not just them, but Saturday afternoons for all those years. Loved it. Absolutely loved every minute of it.
They're the perfect warm-up act, though, I think, as well, because Sportsound is meant to be the informative show, whereas they are basically they describe themselves as the polar opposite of that, Richard. Yeah. I think it makes sense. It's quite a clever programme schedule to have them on before sort of being the contrast. It's like apples and oranges, literally. That is like the two shows that Saturday. And that thing that takes up, that's became part of the fabric, I think, of Scottish football fans sort of listening over the last, 30, 40 years, however long it's been.
Yeah, I mean, it took a little while to bed in off the ball because when they came up with the idea initially, Sanjeev Kohli was certainly involved. There were a couple of other people who were involved at that time. Tam, I think, might have been involved, but certainly he and Stuart when they were brought together. In fact, I heard Tam talking about this the other day. It was the first time they actually met was when they met that morning, an hour and a half, 2 hours before they went on air. So they were obviously feeling their way, but Scottish football wasn't quite ready for them at that point, because there was only an excuse, and everyone accepted that Johnny was taking the rise out of the various individuals. They did it in a very different way, and I remember getting various complaints from managers, from players back in the day, because they were getting the piss taken out of them on the radio, and they weren't used to it. So it did settle down after a wee while, and I mean, I think it's 28 years they've been going, and I still think it's a great listen. I love listening to the guys.
Oh, it's my favourite show. I think it's a football show that's not very football related. So you see women in their 50s and 60s driving along in the cars and they're listening to it, and I think it's great that they've captured that imagination of non-football fans because of how funny they are, but they've also captured the imagination of guys like myself and Russell who live and eat football. You know what I mean? It's a great format, and it's quite engaging with the listeners as well. And that's what Russell does on their show. We're always bringing up comments from the listeners, and I think that's a great thing to do, is show that wee bit of engagement with the folk that are tuning in every week and every day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tam is probably the sharpest comedic mind I've ever worked with. I mean, he's like that. Wow. He's you really can't. It's very difficult to catch him out. But some of the best humour on their show, has actually come from the fans, the listeners. I mean, some of the emails, some of the texts they read out, the ones always, it's the acronyms, and I can't remember it now, but there's one about Bobby Charlton, and I think ball bags. I can't remember exactly how it goes. And then you've got the other one I always loved was the guys, their nickname at work. So it's you're right. It's certainly not in any way supposed to be informative in that sense, but I think they get the best out of so many of the guests because of the style of the program, and they know it's going to be irreverent. They know it's going to be that Tam is going to be having a go at them. He's going to be digging in. He's going to be saying things that other people couldn't say on other shows, probably. Mm-hmm. And it's accepted now because they're well embedded. It's accepted now that that's what Tam's like.
I think it's refreshing. That's what I like about it, and I think one of the things we want to talk about. We could have done a generic show today, and says, when did you first start loving football, Richard? And, when did it all begin for you? And when did you realise you wanted... Who really wants that anymore? I think that the doors have been very much open. I think the Off the Ball was the first one to give you the insight into people's characters that you might not get. You might not see these sort of questions on other formats. And I do believe as well, whether people like it or not, Open Goal definitely, I think, is then took it to that next stage. And you look at, I remember them interviewing Chick Young and guys, we're Celtic supporters and stuff, Richard, right? That's fine. And it's easy in your mind to have caricatures of people like Jim White as well. And they might lean one way, so that necessarily means you don't like them. Then you watch them be, Simon Ferry just goes up to the door with a key, unlocks the door, and before you know it, you go, do you know what? They're all right. They're just telling, and I think that's very important. So hopefully today, it's going to be a wee bit informal, right? A wee bit informal. But I think it's also insightful for fans to find out, you did this for 30 years, that Saturday slot. Is that right?
Over 30, yeah, but 30 full seasons, yeah.
That's a long time. I understand that you're still going to be doing Sundays and midweek. But talk us through, set the scene on what it's like in that studio on a Saturday, because obviously you don't just walk in at 5 to 12, Richard, right? And go, just give me the headphones, mate, and I'll start chatting away. It can't work like that. But also, I think we do an hour-long show, Richard, and we're out of puff. We're knackered by the end of an hour live show. You're doing it for 6 hours. I mean, is there pizza flying about? Is there do you have coffees just left, right, and centre? Talk us through what the studio is like.
I think one of I'm not active on Twitter, but I saw, and people have sent me various responses. I think the best response I saw was from Tam McManus, who said, we're going to miss him on a Saturday afternoon. He's got a great job. He's done a great job over the years. But the biggest thing that impresses me most is he manages to go 6 hours without a pish on a Saturday. For a man of his age. Which
that's impressive.
I mean, I have been known to say, how long is this interview? 3.5 minutes, right? That gives me time to nip to the loo and back again. A lot of my approach to the programme, towards the end, it was very different to what it would have been 20 years ago, 25 years ago. You inevitably, you built up the experience. I hesitate to say there's almost nothing that surprises you, because pretty much every Saturday afternoon something surprised you.
Especially in Scottish football.
So, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's as Tom English likes to say, it's just bonkers. It is absolutely bonkers, Scottish football. And that was one of the biggest appeals of the show, was just that you never knew. I mean, there's not a single word of that program is scripted. Everything is just, it's my reaction. My feeling always was, right, we get on air and then we'll see what happens. And then the producer will have come up with various items. We'll have recorded some interviews. I mean, back in the day, we had to record everything. We didn't have the access to do live interviews, so everything was either recorded in advance or was recorded on the day and then played out. So you really are at the mercy of what happens. So the preparation really begins right the way throughout the course of the week. I mean, I've always kept my own stats. I've got my folder that gets printed off each week, and it was always there beside me. So if in doubt, I could turn my page. It's amazing how much has sunk in, even at my advanced age. So it's still there, and you remember just off the top of your head that, I don't know, Tom Rogic has just scored his 7th goal of the season. I just instinctively, I know, because I've been printing stuff off and I've been updating it throughout the course. So that's all there. You build up this bank that you can rely on, and on countless occasions, I've been sat there, and often if the lines have gone down or if we're having technical issues, and it's just me, and it's I suppose it's quite lonely. You're in that studio, you're in the ground, and you're the only one who can talk. And the amount of times in my head, I'm going, I've got no idea what I'm going to say next. I do not have a clue, but somehow my mouth's still moving and there are words coming out. And at times, honestly, I couldn't tell you 30 seconds later what I'd said, but I'd said something. And as long as I was still doing that, some kind of defense mechanism clicked in the back of my mind, and I'd be down the cul-de-sac, I'd do a wee UE, and then I'd come back up again, and then I'd be back on track. So that happened regularly. In fact, that happened to every single program. And I suppose, why I was employed to do it was that I was able to cope with that. And
it's a skill in itself,
hopefully,
isn't it?
Hopefully
it is,
people
though.
weren't aware.
You're playing it down. You're probably playing it down thinking, I'm just, I don't even know what I'm next going to say and stuff like that. But that becomes a skill in itself when you're put under that situation. You can just sort of roll with the punches, I think they call it ad-libbing in the music world, don't they? At the end of a song.
It comes with experience, and you can't do that when you've been doing the job for 3 weeks. You can do it when you've been doing it for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. So, I mean, you can have painted that picture of you wouldn't just walk into the studio, put the headphones on and start talking. I mean, there were times when that was exactly what happened, because all the prep had been done in advance. You'd had the conversation. I mean, there was one time, one of my pals he'd been in Glasgow, and we'd got him in as a guest, and he was just sitting there in the studio, and myself and 2 or 3 of the pundits. I can't remember I think it was an Aberdeen Rangers game, actually. And Trev was in the studio, and so I was kind of chatting away to him, and then but with the headphones half on, and the producer said, right, that's it. So the Sting gets played, and so I'm kind of chatting to him, and literally just slid the other one on, and good evening, very warm welcome from you, Richard Gordon. And it was only afterwards he said, I thought you were just rehearsing. You're actually gone live. And that's not, that doesn't mean I wasn't taking it seriously, but you reach a situation where you're able to do that. I would never, for me, the program was always the main thing. It was never, it's about the individuals, but the individuals all contribute to the program. And having been involved in that program when it was a very different animal, and having been part of the transformation, I guess, over the years to become the program to become the program it became. I mean, I love that program to bits, and it was really, really important to me. So I would never disrespect it in that sense. But you do reach a stage where, in anyone's job, you know it inside out. And as long as you're being professional about it, then you can. You
must forget you're on air. You must just forget that you're speaking to, I don't know, maybe 500,000 people. It must become quite just like a conversation like you're having just now. Just like, It must just become like second nature almost.
There's 2 million listeners right now, though. That's the only difference, right?
Oh, there's 2 million, is there? God, I downplayed that there. Richard, see on your notes, I think I've mentioned this to you before when I gave you a private message trying to be a fly man. You keep all your match day notes, don't you, from all your previous games for all your years?
Yeah, I've got.
And are you getting any plans for them?
Any?
Have you got any plans for a book or plans to do something with them? It seems like a bit of a waste.
Yeah, no, I would. I've done 3 books in the past, and they consume your life for a year, and they were.
All right.
The Gothenburg one was very much Aberdeens. It was the 30th anniversary of Aberdeen winning Cup Winners' Cup. That was very much a kind of personal odyssey, if you like, and it was just having been there as a punter back in the day, to get the chance to put that together was phenomenal. And to be honest, I kind of thought that would probably be the only book I wrote. And then the agent, the publisher, said to me, "Well, what about number 2?" And I wasn't sure, to be honest. But we were next into it was going to be the 40th anniversary of Scotland reaching the '74 World Cup finals, which was the first World Cup finals I really remember. So that was kind of dear to my heart as well. I thought, right, okay, I'll do that. And that was a very different type of research that was required for that, but I absolutely loved doing that book and talking to heroes. And the difference being the Gothenburg, I knew about half the players, more than that probably, in the Aberdeen team. But it was all closer to home, whereas Scotland '74, there was an Aberdeen connection. It was Martin Buchan, I remember, Peter Lorimer, Dennis Law, Joe Jordan. Talking to some of these guys who were part of that squad. And that was brilliant, because while I thought I remembered lots about that '74 World Cup and the squad and the stories that surrounded it, there was so much going on. So that was brilliant. I mean, I just loved doing that one. And then there was Tales from the Dugout I did, which was just it was a much lighter, but a very, very different type of book. And again, just getting lots of anecdotes, stories from guys, but all surrounding the dugout, so the technical area, and there were some fantastic stories came out of that. So there were good reasons for doing each of them, I think. So I think it would have to be a really, really interesting project, one that excited me to make me want to do that again. And writing about myself is not there's no excitement.
I think there's a lot of information in amongst those notes that would maybe become good for an anorak. Somebody who's really.
Well, I think some of my notebooks. Well, they certainly at one stage went into the Scottish Football Museum at Hampden. I'm assuming they're probably sitting in one of the storerooms down the back of the National Stadium at the moment.
That's impressive, the way. You must be proud of that moment. That must be great.
It was lovely. And they were. I do remember they were on show at one stage, but I would imagine they've been usurped by somewhat more important pieces of memorabilia.
Is it next to John Mawson's jacket at Wembley?
I'm pretty sure that, I don't know if it's still there, but certainly Archie's camel coats and Arthur Montford's check jacket, I'm sure they were in there at one stage.
Good company.
Aye, that's not bad.
No,
I mean, look, at some stage, because they're scattered around, I know they're in an attic somewhere, and I've got loads of them just in various things here. I will have to kind of gather them all together, but if I go through probably 4 of the A4 hardback notebooks each season, so a very quick sum, there's about 120 of them kicking around. And I did use them actually during lockdown. When we were all hugely bored. I do remember at one stage on Instagram, I was sorting some stuff out, and I said, look, I've come across these old notebooks. I'm kind of trying to tidy them up. Give me a game, and I'll go back, and I would take a photograph of my notes from a particular game, and I put them up. And there were some interesting. I mean, obviously, I wasn't at every game, but there were some interesting ones. And it was, from my point of view, it was great going back and just seeing. And the lovely thing is, you can see my handwriting. I'm quite neat. My handwriting from mid-July through until about mid-October is very legible and is very presentable. As you go through the 4 months, especially obviously outdoors, when you've got 7 layers on and the wee heater between your knees trying to stay warm and I can barely read some of the writing. Because my hands are so, I mean, literally some days your hands are so cold you cannot write. It's
mad. I never even think of stuff like that, because obviously, I don't know, is a shorthand not meant to be some sort of format as well that people do? I used to know John Docherty's son. You know, he was the journalist at the Daily Record, and he used to, like, I used to go for, like, stay over or whatever when we were young, and I promise you, he'd show you shorthand on a notepad and say, "I went, it's like a completely different written language that you need to learn. It's completely."
Yeah, but when I started in radio at North Sound back in '87, I went to shorthand classes one evening a week. T-line, from memory, I think was the format that I used. I never got up beyond about 80 words a minute.
Really?
Some people are doing 120, I think so. No, I mean, and I can still, in my mind, I can still do the shorthand, but no, I'm just looking at one notebook. It's more scribbles than actual real shorthand these days. But no, I mean, back in the day, you had to do that. But of course, folk now, a lot of journalists just use your phones to record interviews, and you can always go back and make sure that you've got the quotes right that way.
That's fair up. But see, the thing is, with all these notes that you've been taking, obviously your broadcasting career hasn't always been on the radio. I remember you doing Sports Scene. Would that be right thinking you presented some of the shows on the road to Seville?
Yeah.
Celtic Road to Seville, you did? I'm sure you
did.
did.
No, I certainly did radio.
You were definitely presenting it anyway in that sort of era on the Saturday afternoon at the very least.
Yeah, I did. When did I do telly? I did telly 96. No, it would have been before then. So it was when Dougie Donnelly, Dougie obviously was the Saturday night Sports Scene presenter, and then more and more Dougie would be off doing golf. He'd been doing golf coverage, and it reached a point, and there were 2 seasons where I think I did half the Sports Scene on a Saturday evening. So yeah, probably from about 90. Well, I went freelance in 96. So probably the early to the mid. No, through to the late 90s. Actually, I was still doing it, and there were certainly some Saturdays, quite a few Saturdays, where I did sports in the afternoon, back in the old BBC, and then along to the other end of the building, and then got organised and did Sports Scene at night. They were pretty training.
What did you prefer? Did you prefer being on the TV?
Always radio. No, I just, from the moment I stepped into a radio studio, I fell in love with the medium. I mean, so many people I've worked with over the years were only in radio because they saw it as a stepping stone to telly. Lots of others who were on the radio, they wanted to get into management or production. And I never, ever understood why anyone wouldn't want to be sitting behind a radio microphone and getting paid to talk about something they loved. Now, I fully appreciate not everyone in radio is in that position. I mean, I was in such a lucky position for all those years. But nothing, no. I mean, if you say to me, right, you can only do telly, you can only do radio, well, it would have been radio for me every day of the week.
So when you were doing the TV, was that like you almost like being asked to do it as almost a favour sort of thing, or was that kind of part of your contract sort of thing? Or?
I mean, I was never staff. So basically, if I did Sports Scene as well, then I got paid extra for doing Sports Scene. So as a freelancer, you simply don't turn down work.
No.
So I did that, and then I had another spell. No, I must have done it through until at the end of the 90s, I guess. And then there was a spell. Telly got live. They got the live football at one point. That must have been when Satanta, I think, went bust, and then Telly got the live coverage. And I certainly did some games then. But yeah, you're right. I did European games. I do remember being. In fact, I remember being in the studio with Mark Reefer on the night that Henrik Larsson broke his leg in Lyon. I was certainly doing that. I've got a very clear memory of being at Celtic Park or doing the radio for some of the games on the road to Seville. And I was certainly in Seville. That was a hell of a week. And I'm sure as fans you have stories that probably shouldn't be repeated. As a broadcaster, there are certainly stories that I will never repeat, other than with my closest friends. And that's not anything I did, just things that happened. It was just one of those weeks.
How was that, Richard? Was that good for, see, as a Scottish journalist going abroad? Was it good to finally see a Scottish team? I know Aberdeen were in the 80s and you had a kind of emotional attachment to it, but as a journalist itself, when you seen Celtic take over Seville, how did that feel? Were you proud as a Scotsman, or were you strictly professional?
No, I know, totally. Totally proud, because having grown up through the 70s and 80s, and having been in Gothenburg, and then I was actually chatting with this a friend the other day, how when Dundee United played Gothenburg in the UEFA Cup final in '89, how now I'm not saying every Aberdeen fan, because there is that rivalry, but as an Aberdeen fan, I certainly wanted United to win the European final. I remember being gutted when they lost out. So, but having then moved into broadcast, I was in broadcasting at that point, but having moved into the BBC via a brief stop at Radio Clyde, so that was '91. So there was '91 right the way through. All those years without. I mean, Rangers had that run in the Champions League. Pardon me, and obviously everything that happened with Marseille. But beyond that, there was a real fallow period there where nothing was happening. Nothing very much was happening for Scottish teams. And that run just caught the imagination as Celtic. And they got, some big teams have beaten that run. And
the teams they were beating, that was what captured the imagination, because see, on paper, like the Blackburn Rovers, now today it's 25 years since Henrik Larsson actually signed for Celtic. I think Celtic's doing quite a big Henrik Larsson Day sort of thing. But you remember the time with Blackburn, now on paper, Blackburn Rovers isn't all that big a deal. It's really like playing, I don't know, Rennes or something. It's not that big a deal. But Graham Souness brought in this panto villain role, and before you know it, that game had completely... It became like and I think the first leg was on Halloween. So the whole thing was just getting dressed up perfectly. It could be promoted in the right way. And then, of course, the men against boys comments and stuff like that. And you just thought, I just thought it added spice. And that was only the second round. And you thought, that set the tone for this tournament. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. No, I mean, the week of Seville. So I was around that time, well, for a long time. I was a stand-in for Fred Macaulay when he had his morning show on BBC Radio Scotland. So for years, I would stand in when Fred was away. I mean, that kind of part of my life was standing in for everybody else when they're off touring the world. And it was a great show. I loved doing that show. It was very different from the football. It was a lot of light-hearted, a lot of entertainment, comedians, musicians. I mean, I was interviewing folk in soaps I've never even heard of, but the same principles apply to, as long as somebody's prepared to actually answer questions, which occasionally didn't happen. The principle was there. So as part of that, and I don't quite know how Fred didn't manage to swing it, but he was in the studio in Glasgow each morning that week, and I was co-hosting from Seville. So we were out and about, we were all over the city, we're doing all sorts, quite apart from the football side of it that I was doing. And so I saw a lot. I saw a lot of the city, I saw a lot of the fans. I mean, it was mind-boggling. I do remember coming round the corner early one morning, and there was a little square, and then there were the steps at the cathedral, or it was certainly a big building, and you couldn't actually see a single step. There were Celtic fans sleeping on the steps all the way up to the top. It was absolutely phenomenal. I remember we did a section on a boat where we were going down there on a boat. Elaine C. Smith was on that boat, I think, and you passing and just lined up and down the banks, just Celtic fans everywhere. So I mean, I kind of knew that. I know there's been a lot of fun about how many Celtic fans were actually there. Well, I mean, the kind of figures that are bandied around can't be far short of the truth. Yeah. Unless I was seeing the same 300 folk in every single place. And just
well, I think there was a roll of honour that people signed on the way back, and it was 80,000 had signed this roll of honour. I think that's where the figure came from. Wow. But I have seen the Seville calculator, and it goes from $250,000 to 400 billion at some points. But it's something it must be. I just when I heard you laughing there, it reminded me of the time. Just quickly, when Jim Spence got locked inside the Celtic Park toilets, can you tell me a bit about that?
So back then, that was before open all mics. But what we were doing at that stage, I'd kind of worked this out with the editor, right? So when I'm in the studio, and back in those days, I generally was in the studio on a Saturday afternoon. So in one ear, one headphone, I'm hearing the output, and I'm hearing what's actually going on air, what the guys who are talking on air, what I'm saying. In the other ear, I could hear a feed of the ground. So if there was a goal scored at one of the stadiums, the reporter would just say, "Goal at Tynecastle." I would hear that, and I would just immediately go, "Let's quickly go to Tynecastle. That's going to go." So this was before the game, and we're on the first hour of the build-up. And as I'm chatting, I just hear, "What the hell's that?" And then this wee voice goes, "Hello? Oh, hello. Can you let me out? I'm locked in." I can't, whoever was talking to him, I'm just going to interrupt you. I think that one of our intrepid reporters is having some issues. Jim Spence, are you okay? Like, "No, I'm locked in the toilets at Celtic Park." I said, "Jim, which toilets are you in?" "Oh, the one that just down the stairs from the press box." I said, "Jim, look up." And you see at the sound, he went, "All right, it's a one-way system." he never saw the sign. It said no entry. You come in that door, you go out the other door.
Oh, what a character he is. I can picture that scene. That must have been hilarious. When I heard you laugh there, I can still vision it in my head.
I don't think I could speak for about 20 minutes afterwards. So funny. And I think the reason we all laughed was we all could immediately picture where he was, and the fact that he's about 6 feet with his hair, but he's only about 5'2", really. And he's just too wee to actually see the sign.
Oh, that's hilarious. Because Jim Spence is a bit of a funny character at the best of times. So it probably could make it more funny that it happened to him rather than happen to somebody a bit more serious. You know what I mean? And I could I've got a memory of that. I think about it when I think Tam mentions it every now and again off the ball, and hearing you laugh there just sent me back to it.
I mean, that must be 25 years ago.
Oh, it was a long time ago. Aye, maybe aye.
Gone in a flash. No, I mean, there's been so many moments like that over the years involving the guys that and I think that was always part of it, that there's a serious side. We all know there's a serious side to football because we all desperately want our team to win.
Of course.
But within that, and I think to a large extent, and I think social media has got a part to play in this, that has maybe been lost in recent years. You can have that rivalry. You can have that without it spilling over, and that's when it kind of depresses me. And so I think we've always tried to have that element of fun as part of it. And certainly when we started open all mics, I think probably at times we went too far, and you always had to guard against it becoming almost an in-joke. It might be funny for us, but everybody listening has got no idea of what we were talking about. It. Yeah, so you need to know that. I mean, there was actually Spency again. I've completely forgotten about it. Spency, as of nowhere or out of nothing, one day just suddenly went, "I went up the stairs in my mother's loft and found Bobby Glennie there the other day." The central defender from the mid or late 70s and early 80s. What? I can't know if he roofs lofts or if he puts in satellite TV or whatever it was, but
interesting point you raised though with the growth of it, because I suppose social media started growing, maybe just over a decade ago. And then obviously the platform we're on right now is fan media. I hate all that nonsense, to be completely honest with you. But fan media has now obviously arrived. It's now got its own access to press conferences at each club individually and stuff like that. Whilst the growth of the social media, I kind of tend to agree with you. I think there's been a toxicity that's been added to the football rivalry. It's actually unnecessary. Richard, what we've found, even on this, by having an opinion that might go against the grain of the masses, even internally, fans will start, because you are part of fan media, we have a podcast, that becomes that's the problem. So me having a different opinion on whether it be the Aaron Moy signing recently, right? I was nonplussed by it, shall we say. That was it. I wasn't slagging him personally. It didn't excite me. That leads to these guys with a platform. And I find all that, and it's all quote tweets, and it's all trying to get pylons. And I feel like you look at that, and then you amplify that by 1 million, and you get to, Tom English, for example, saying something. Now, this isn't me defending or praising Tom English, yada, yada, but any point he makes, that's even magnified further on a platform like Twitter. Mm-hmm. And he's got to read all that abuse and just turn a blind eye and go on live and still be himself in the next day's show. This isn't me doing a defense of Tom English or any of that nonsense. I just mean that is an example where you look at the actual the volume of these. I nearly said velocity there, like Gordon Strachan. The volume of tweet replies he's getting, the quote tweets, the pylons, just for one opinion that maybe even I didn't agree with. But does it really become necessary to be that? Also, not just with social media, how do you feel like within the MSM, the reaction from your side of the fence has been to the growth of fan media? Is it something that was always embraced? Because I feel it was like the bloggers that kind of sort of started it, Richard. Do you know what I mean? See what, the 2012 stuff, don't worry, we're not going into all that nonsense. It's not my style. But that's where the blogs really sort of hit a peak. That was like, oh, they're the ones undercovering the truth, and MSM we can't rely on anymore. And I think that brought a focus onto what fans could bring to the media table. Now it turns into podcasts, now it turns into YouTube channels, and I'm sure there'll be another stage development of that. Has the MSM kind of learned how to live in a world with fan media now, Richard, as opposed to who's these new kids on the block sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the younger ones, they've if they haven't quite grown up with it, then they're much more in touch with it. The older guy, there will be some of the mainstream media who have no knowledge or interest and have no social media footstep anyway, or footprint anyway. Yeah. So don't have any. I mean, I've got to say, I think this kind of thing, I think is great because you're out there. We can see who you are, and we hear you. We hear exactly what you say and hear exactly what your guests say. A lot of what you see on Twitter, partly what does my head in is that it's the anonymity of it all, and it's the things that are said that become fact. And back in in the past, I've kind of suffered that. Now, and that played a part in I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago. I thought, right, I'm coming off Twitter. I was fed up. Every now and again, there would be a campaign launched on one fan website or another, and you would wake up to 250 notifications telling you you're what. So I don't need that in my life. I've got enough going on. I don't need it. So it was quite liberating actually at the end of that season just to get that done. In terms of Tom, I think there are those in the media who are on social media who will say things just to stir things up. We've probably all got our own opinions as to who those people are. I'm not going to mention any names, but I would say that Tom English absolutely is not one of those. Tom, he does try to be humorous at times, and he is humorous at times. Sadly, humour can get lost on social media. It sounds you're not allowed to be funny on Twitter.
No, absolutely not.
Because it gets taken the wrong way. But I would suggest that virtually everything Tom puts there, if he's not going for the comedic element, what he puts on there, he firmly believes, and he would suggest he could back up entirely. But the amount of times, and he's shown me it, and okay, if I'm in the studio with him, I'll look at this, and it's folk don't even read properly what is being said at times, because in their mind they've already formed an opinion as to what somebody is going to say or what they're likely to say, and they just off they go. Yeah. So no, I mean that's a side of it that I whether it'll run out of steam, whether something else will take over, whether it'll become a less toxic part of the coverage, I don't know. But I mean, for me, it's all kind of it. Back in the day, it was the fanzines, and I'm of an age. I remember the fanzines coming in, and actually they were a real breath of fresh air. I'm talking about Jim Spence. He was heavily involved in the United one, I think, back in the early days. And I suppose you're right. Everything just has moved on. It's got to the point where the mainstream media is less important than it was. There's no question. But you look at newspaper circulation. I'm sure actually listening figures, viewing figures for radio and TV is probably down as well, because there are so many other different ways to get the information that you get. I mean, I use it now purely as certainly Twitter, as a news source. I follow about 15 or 16 news feeds. I think it's a really good resource in that respect, but I don't see any of the nonsense unless occasionally somebody sends it to me. So I think there's a balance. But this, I like the fact that podcasts have sprung up in the way that they have, and that guys are getting a chance to get their message across and to air their views, but they're doing it in a way that is more honest than much of what we see on Twitter.
It's more respectful as well. I think on Twitter it's quite toxic, and I'm glad you mentioned Tom English. Like, sometimes people's persona kind of dictates the way any message is put forward and how it's received. You know, me and Bhoycie, Muscle Beer, us two are victims of it ourselves, and it doesn't matter how far you articulate your point. As you say, if folk don't want to read it, it's almost like they just kind of brush off any content or any, source of what you're saying. They just don't want to see that. And I think it must be really hard for likes of yourself. I know you're off Twitter just now, but it must be hard for you to maybe get these ridiculous comments on Twitter and other platforms and just carry on like it doesn't matter to you, because football players, we all got this kind of opinion because they're on all this money. They should just ignore the personal abuse, but it must affect them. And the same must be the case for guys in the media like yourself, who are just basically just doing a job, is try to be as balanced as possible. And I mean, that can't be easy for somebody who's a self-admitted Aberdeen fan. There isn't a lot of people in the media that come out and say who they support, and that's part of the problem, I feel like, and especially for Celtic fans and Rangers fans, we've got this mistrust for anybody. So I think when you hear somebody like Tom English, and there's a perception that the guy's going to be wrong straight away before he starts speaking.
Yeah. See on that, now you've got to remember as well, see on what Richard shows, he will have ex-players, so you know where their allegiances lie. Does that mean because you know where their allegiances lie, you give them a fair crack of the whip? No. You instantly think Neil McCann, for example, would
he's got an agenda
before he spoke. So
that's true.
It doesn't. And I'm not saying he is, by the way. I don't mean it like that. I just mean when you know what their allegiance is, I don't always think it's always going to be the most constructive thing going forward, because I just think
they are. No, they are.
In our mindsets that goes, well, if they're associated with that club, then that means everything they say is from that prism. And I don't know if Richard's in a fortunate position. I don't mean this in a bad way, but the club that he's announced he supports isn't part of the duopoly. I really was trying to say that one right. I really was.
That's your Cosgrove that says that sort of stuff.
I'm nervous. Duopoly. Do you know what I mean? But it's not Celtic or Rangers, essentially.
Yeah.
I wonder if that makes it more palatable for a lot of the audience. So I don't mean that in a bad way.
I mean, for a large chunk of the time that I presented Sportsound, I was a figure of fun because I supported Aberdeen, because we were so terrible for such. I mean, Derek McInnes at least gave us some self-respect back and a trophy. It was never a conscious decision. I mean, I think it was dear old Bob Crampsey who, on a programme very, very early days, said something about me being an Aberdeen supporter, and the editor at the time just about choked in his coffee. I mean, you can't be saying that kind of thing on air. And so we were talking about it afterwards. But why? Of course, I'm a football fan, because I wouldn't be doing this programme if I wasn't a football fan. And what does it matter who I support? Because I'm going to go on and do the same job, whether it's an Aberdeen game, whether it's a Celtic game, whether it's a Hearts game. I am going to apply the same professional principles to it.
It comes across that way, Richard. It does come across that way from a listener, and Russell will agree. I mean, there certainly is a mistrust, but with yourself, and it's not just because you're on the show, but there is like a genuine, like, when you're putting a point, an opinion on something, it does feel like it's coming from just knowledge and maybe personal experience and what's going on and what you've seen before happening, but rather than just it came from an agenda-driven part of your brain. You know, it does come across like it's balanced. You know, and is that how it became hard for you as an Aberdeen fan to be balanced when you're seeing maybe heartbreaking moments? Is it hard for you to take yourself away, take the hat off?
Isn't it? He's just not. He's just not.
I don't know what around that good question.
Your introduction there, you've got Tom Rogic scoring in the cup final.
Aye, sorry. So Tom Rogic's goal. You got it.
The lightning flashes across above Hampden Park. And I've then got to spend the next hour congratulating Celtic and enjoying
Must
the
be hard.
teams. And I've become used to it over the years. What I've always said, and even though it was Aberdeen who lost that final, I think I've lost a few other finals that I've attended over the years, I always thought, right, when a team has won a cup final, the final part of the programme has to be about that team. It has to be about that team, its achievements, the celebration. And you notice, even if it's against your team, that you cannot help but get swept away by 40,000, 30,000, 25,000 fans inside a stadium, knowing that this is one of the moments of their life. Seeing the players down there, some maybe picking up the first medals of their career, some maybe playing their last game. I mean, there are so many little stories that attach to a final and everything that goes with it. And inside, I'm gutted. And as soon as I get back in the car, I'm gutted. But actually, during that period of time, it's you get swept up in the excitement. And you know, I mean, there'll be certain finals, and I mean, for instance, when Kilmarnock won the League Cup, I mean, it was totally unexpected, as you will remember. The Dieter Van Schoenhout, I think, scored it. I mean, there were a lot, but so you've got occasionally when you get the big upset, that's really, really exciting. That's incredible. That's mind blowing at times. But it's no different from Celtic winning yet another treble, because the celebrations are the celebrations. So no, I'm able to. I've always been able to cut myself away from the personal misery that's going on inside.
I find that hard. I would find that I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I couldn't do that. I'm not trained the way you are, I suppose, but even me as a person.
I mean, it's different if you're doing the commentary, but if I'm doing what I normally did during the game, I'm sitting there. I've got no qualms about saying, if Aberdeen scoring a cup final, a big game at Celtic Park, whatever. I mean, under the desk, I'm giving it yes. But the moment the half-time whistle, full-time whistle goes, and I'm back on the microphone, then I need to be professional again. There was a guy, I remember. I mean, Aberdeen had gone years and years without winning at Celtic Park, and then we won 3-2. Now I always get the two mixed up. It was the 3-2? John Stewart, I think, scored the winner on the 2-1. Was that the 2-1 game? I think. Yeah. And then
I remember
around that
when it was
time
Stewart.
as well, there was a 3-2 as well. I think Pasquinelli, who used to be at Livingston, scored a couple of goals for Aberdeen that night. But I remember there was a guy sitting there. I would see him in the main stand at Celtic Park from time to time. And Aberdeen had gone, and then the game I'm talking about had gone 2-0 up, and he's kind of looking across, going. But then Celtic, of course, as Celtic do, coming back into it, they get the first goal, and he's next smiling, they get the second goal, smiling, and he's kind of all good natured, and then Aberdeen break away and the score right at the very end, and I just glanced round.
Every sign under the sun.
It was lovely. It was just, but he knew that was my team, but. And as I say, during the game, definitely, but the moment that the whistle goes, then you need to kind of click back into it again.
That's fair. Me and Bhoycie both felt that it'd be hard to take yourself away from that kind of that zone, and especially in the action. I suppose when you're actually working, you're kind of concentrating on the next interview or the next segment, or keeping Billy Dodge from falling off his fucking chair or something, and so it must be easier for you. But I just couldn't sit there and just. If I was sitting there and Rangers scored, I'd take the headphones off and walk away. I'd be livid, And so good on you for having that restraint. But I just thought I'd ask that question, and I was actually going to say Tom Rogic, but I didn't want to be so obvious. But I've actually got a bad story about that match if you want to hear it. So I So I had bought tickets. I had 2 tickets for the match and get myself all excited for it. And then I realised I was going on holiday and my flight was leaving about 5 minutes before full time, and I wasn't getting out of this one. So I had to I was on the plane and my iPad, this is a true story, my wife would tell you, my iPad cut out in the 88th minute, I think it was. And I was sitting, I'm one of the Celtic dads with a Celtic tracksuit, Celtic hat, and believe it or not, the pilot came out the plane at the front to do a toilet. This is about 2 hours into the flight, and he said to me, "Are you happy with that?" I said, "Well, what happened? What the hell happened?" And he went, "Well, I don't know what happened, but I know you won the match 3-2. And I just went, "Oh, fucking your beauty!" And I couldn't wait to get off the plane to check my Wi-Fi and get a signal and see Tom Rogic's goal. And it's probably, Russell agree with me here, it's probably one of the most, one of the best moments for any Celtic fan in the last 20 years. And it just, for me, it's got a bittersweet taste to it because I didn't actually see it. And my brothers, they said to me what you said about the lightning strike, and he said there was some sort of lightning strike or a flash in the sky when Tom Rogic scored that beautiful goal. Sorry to describe it that way, Richard, but it was a beautiful goal, and that must have been heartbreaking seeing that. And you're a better man than me.
It was. I mean, it was astonishing, and it was kind of almost felt it was written in the stars. And I'll be honest, had that game gone on, I think that Aberdeen were out on their feet at that point anyway. Sure. So it probably would have been the same scenario. But yeah, it was kind of written in the stars, and especially Rogic. I mean, how many times did he do it against Aberdeen? I mean, I have to say he was over the past decade or so, he's been one of my favourite players to watch in Scottish football. I think his touch and his awareness and the things he was able to do with football at times. But yeah, it had to be him, and suddenly he was there. And literally, I mean, my memory at the time is literally just as he was about to hit the ball, I was just aware of this flash across the sky above Hampden, and then boom, ball was in the net. It was like, what the hell happened?
I'm glad you said that, because folk think it's almost mythical that happening, and my brothers have said to me, "Look, this happened, Mark," you know, and I was in the sky going in my holiday, and do you know what? I would have missed that full holiday if I could just get that moment back and get to that match. And I did it the following season. I missed the 5-0 game the following season to win the league against Rangers, but that's another story. But I just thought I would ask you that question about Tom Rogic, because that's a Tom Rogic game for Celtic fans, and it's probably really bitter for you, I suppose, when you actually retire and look back on it.
Yeah, I mean, clearly I wanted Aberdeen to win that cup final, but because definitely, I mean, you do partition yourself in that respect. I mean, I look forward now to, although certainly with Cove, I'm finding it really difficult. It's even more nerve-wracking now because you're involved with the club, actually, than I found it purely as an Aberdeen fan. But I'm looking forward to being able to, certainly once I move back up the road, which I'll be doing permanently in a couple of months, to actually get a chance to go and watch a couple of Aberdeen's games, hopefully, just as a fan, and just not have to take any notes, not have to worry about what the other team are doing and what formation they're in, who's coming on as a sub, just to purely watch the game from an Aberdeen point of view.
Can you switch off though? Is it hard to switch off?
Aye, it's rubbish actually. So, I mean, in terms of the role at Cove and how it's still evolving, but I mean, everybody just kind of mucks in and does. So there's been a few games. I'm doing the kind of hospitality with the guests there, doing about chat and interviewing them, welcoming people there. But I'm also looking after the media side of things and the website, and thankfully I've got a couple of guys who I work with, and one of them, younger guy, he looks after the social media side of things. So we're kind of evolving. But I've also, a few of the games, I've had to do the match reports, so you're kind of watching the game, I had to make notes, and then there was a couple of games where I've been doing the hospitality, I've been doing the match report, I've been doing the stadium announcing, I've been doing the interviews afterwards.
They're getting the money's worth out of you, aren't they?
I was like, but it's all part of the. I mean, when I spoke to the chairman, the first meeting we had, and we were chatting about it, I said, "But what exactly is it you want me to do?" And he just went, "Everything, everything." And
the bingo.
it's kind of come up. Well, actually, somebody, in fact, it was Alan McRae's son. Alan McRae, for the former, well, he's honorary president and former Scottish FA president. Alan's son, Darren, saw me. So I was up the back of the stand doing the "Good afternoon, welcome to Balmoral Stadium." And Darren, he started filming me, and of course sends it to Tam Cowan. So Cowan had a bit of fun with that, and kind of spliced it with the little footage of Alan Partridge at the country show. Nobody's listening. It's been eye-opening. I've loved it, but what I found, and a few folk at the club said to me, you find that the club just gets into your heart and soul, and immediately. I'd always followed Cove just because I was an Aberdeen team, and then just as I started in radio, they moved into Highland League, and then the club obviously very slowly has developed and built up over the years. So, and particularly since I went into the SPFL, and I've done various events for them over the years. So I got to know the club, I got to know some of the people there, but it has it just becomes all consuming, and it.
That's what I was going to ask. It consumes you, yeah.
And especially, I mean, as an Aberdeen fan and working in the media all these years, I knew quite a few of the players, and so you wanted, and certainly the guys who became friends, you really wanted them to do well over the years. You suffered in the same way. It's even worse now because we're all part of the club, and everything, as you know, everything is down to the result. Everything is down to what happens, and that dictates the tone for the rest of the week.
Absolutely.
And it's been a tough start of the season for them, but they're just a brilliant bunch of guys. I've got to say, I mean, there's, especially the guys who came up from the Highland League. There's half a dozen of the guys who are, and they're a close bond, and they've done so well. But there are guys there who I'm looking at them even, and I'm now seeing them more closely and watching them in games, 3 or 4 games they've played. These are guys who could have played at a higher level much earlier in their career, and it just shows you how lucky, I suppose, you have to be. You have to be spotted by the right person at the right time.
How fine the lines are as well. The margins are so fine, aren't they?
Totally. It's going to be, I mean, the championship it'll be tough. It's always tough. And obviously we're part-time. We've got some quality in the team. I know Jim McIntyre, he's desperately trying to get a few more bodies in. There is I think the problem that clubs who are seen as remote, if you like, there's a geographical issue, the fact we're part-time. I mean, these are truly things that players have to weigh up. So we've got some really, really good players there.
What's it like? What's the level like, Richard? Is there anybody you think could probably make it at a higher level? And apart from the guys you just mentioned, that's maybe just no breaking football yet, is there guys that you know for a fact that something's going to have to go wrong for them if they don't go up? Right. I mean, right now it's a kind of mixture. So you've got Fraser Pivey, who's obviously, I mean, there's an FA Cup winner who's playing for Ian Vigurs, obviously has been around. I mean, these are skillful players. Mark Reynolds is there. Yep. The Celtic fans' favourite Shay Logan is there. Who's a lovely guy. So I mean, there's experience and quality there, but they've also, I mean, got mentioned. Well, Mitch Meganton is a name that will clearly most sort of football fans will know because he scored barrel loads of goals over years, and again, seeing Mitch, he's had to play in 2 or 3 different positions as Jim looks to kind of get the right formation and just trying out various things with the players. He's an excellent player. I mean, he's technically a very, very good player. Connor Scully, Blair Ewell, he's out injured at the moment. These guys could absolutely have played. At the moment, in terms of the one last year was Harry Milne, who Mark Thistle signed, and he will do so well. But I mean, I think the expectation was that Harry would move to the Premiership because he's an outstanding left wing back. And Ian McCall won a watch when he got Harry on board for. So he's one I think that he would certainly look to make an impact. But it's right. I mean, the plans would be there that we'll kind of get the youth development sorted out. But the lovely thing about Cove, and I saw when it was announced that I was joining, and some of the comments, and there were 1 or 2 people saying, it's just they're the next Gretna, and it's that kind of
stupidity that drives me nuts at times. I mean, it's an entirely different model to, for instance, what Gretna was. It has been built slowly and incrementally. They had a 5-year plan now. They got, which was to get to the championship. They got there in 3, so that was accelerated. They've had to kind of redraw the plan, but everything is done to ensure that the club are on a firm footing, and bit by bit they can, continue to make the step up. And I think that was one of the things that really excited me was getting involved at that level, and just being on the inside, if you like, and trying to play a small part in doing what I can, but certainly seeing and getting an understanding as to what happened. Because after years and years on one side of the fence, assuming that I knew what happened at football clubs, I very quickly realised I had no idea, and God only knows what it's like at Celtic and Rangers and Aberdeen. At our level, I know just how much is going on every single day. That must be
fascinating though, and like reinvigorating almost in a way, because it's almost like you're back to school again. You know, because you're now seeing this from a completely other side of it, but you're not completely removed from the side of it that you're already on, because you're still doing these midweeks and things. So interesting.
Absolutely. And I mean, Keith was right when the chairman, when he said doing everything, because everybody at the club does that. That was the other draw for me, is that I knew there were really good people, and that's another reason why you want to see it going well and you want to see success, because I know the hours that people are putting in.
Sure.
I probably don't. I probably put in more hours than I can imagine. I know the hours that I put in, but everything is just it's not a hardship, because you want to do it and you want to.
It's an adventure.
Help. Yeah. And it's certainly, definitely. I mean, the amount of people have said to me, "Oh, good luck in your retirement." I say, "You can't be fucking joking."
The work's just starting.
I am busier now than I've been in 25 years, 30 years. I mean, it's just there's not a single day goes by that there's not something. I mean, I was actually another day. There's one day since I joined that I haven't opened the laptop and done some Cove work in some way, shape, or form. And that day, it was about 7 o'clock at night. I thought, and I was tempted, and I thought, no, I'm not going to. And I was kind of looking at the laptop, going, no, I'm not, no, I'll leave it for today.
I get that though. I owned a pub for 6 years in my 20s, right? And I know it's different from football, but the principle is the same.
Yeah.
I would go on a holiday with the missus. I think I went on holiday twice during the 6 years, and that tells you, put that phone down. Because she knew I wasn't going to my phone to check Facebook. I was going to check emails. That's the honest truth. I was going to find out that the stock order had been done, because I get a confirmation email come through once you've done it. And she knew it. She went, no, that has to stop. Like, this is a week where you've got to take it to yourself. It's very difficult though when you're invested in something to remove yourself. I do get the temptation to be like that. I relate to that. What you're saying there, it's funny.
I think Tam Cowan had mentioned this, that what am I going to do if Cove Rangers get drawn against Aberdeen in the Scottish Cup?
You were going to ask that, actually. We were interested to that.
I'm an Aberdeen fan. I always will be an Aberdeen fan. It's tough. It's really, really tough, because I know how invested I am in Cove right now. It's going to be another 3, 4, 5 months down the line potentially if they are drawn together. I can just imagine by then I'm sucked right into it. And
Richard, do what Marc did. Get on a flight and then you don't know the score.
I don't ever want to know. I don't ever want to know the score of that game.
Do you know? I think with the fact that you couldn't answer it straight away tells me that you want Aberdeen to win, but you just don't want your new boss to find out that you're a fucking turncoat.
I don't know.
Listen, we get you. We know what you're trying to say. I think if it was me and Bhoycie working for Partick Thistle and Celtic were drawn against him, I can assure you that Partick Thistle would be the second thought in my mind, and there's nothing against that. I mean, you can't take away emotion from football, because if you do that, it just turns into 22 guys kicking a ball about, and we get that. As Celtic fans, we get that.
I think my life will be much easier if we never get drawn together, ever, in anything.
Well, you might get lucky and you might get promoted. And you have to do it 4 times a season. Can you imagine that scenario?
Well, we're talking about that in the. I mean, it's going to be so tough in the championship. I just thought it was actually so. I'd been doing stuff for a few weeks, but officially I started on June the 1st, and Paul Hartley left on June the 2nd.
That's right.
Which everybody was very quick to point out that there was a.
You're the Grim Reaper.
There was a link there. I remember talking to some of the guys at the time, and one very early days, as we're kind of slowly starting to get a feel for what was happening at the club, and seeing how much had to be done, just in terms of the infrastructure and what's required to be a championship club rather than a League Two or a League One club or higher league. And I had to, one thing immediately crossed my mind: oh my God, do not get promoted this year. There's absolutely no chance that we're ready to be playing now. If it happened, we would embrace it and we would love it, and it would be absolutely brilliant. But I don't think anyone should be setting that kind of bar. I mean, I think if we kind of establish
what is the goals, Richard? What is the goals behind the scene? I mean, there must have been conversations that you've been privy to, which you probably haven't been before, even in your journalistic career, or there must have been conversations behind the scenes where they've said, look, we want to get 6th this season and let's just see where we go. And there must be because surely there can't be the case where we just say, tell the fans we don't want to get relegated so we don't get any hopes built up. But it must be a genuine goal to incremental build.
The kind of 5-year plan, the new 5-year plan is there. The chairman and the board, they've drawn it up. I think that they fully understand that everything has to be done only when it can be afforded to be done. I think the last year the wages to turnover ratio was 40%, which is when you think of what it is at some clubs. So and they're not gonna push it to the extent that the club will ever be in any kind of financial trouble. So everything will have to be funded properly, and it'll have to be done step by step. But absolutely, I mean, look, they're ambitious, and ultimately, yes, they see. You look at Ross County, who and what they've done and where they are now and how they've established themselves in the top line, kind of drop down, back up, and now and that is exactly the kind of thing that I think they should be looking at, because and again, slowly you build the fan base. You add to the infrastructure, you add to the stadium. Right now, it's great. I mean, there will be temporary seating put in at both ends once that gets all sorted out. So bit by bit, they're doing what they need to meet the next step and the next step. Ultimately, I know there's been talk about, and certainly the chairman at the end of last season, that was a bit bizarre because I already had agreed with him I'd be coming to the club, but I was sitting in the Sportsound studio interviewing him on the day that they won League One and were heading the championship.
Of course.
And he said, he talked then about it. He said, look, it will be part-time in the season ahead. They're looking at the kind of hybrid where some will be part-time, some will be full-time. But that in itself, I think, throws up its own problems. Because, if you're a full-time manager or coach, what can you do with half a dozen players potentially who are full-time, and then the other 12 are... So I don't know. They will have to look at it. Ultimately, down the line, there will be, if the ambitions are realised, there'll be a full-time club playing at the top flight of Scottish football. And that, I remember Willie Miller often talks about this way back in the day when Cali Thistle were formed, and he remembered and I can't remember who the chairman was at the time, was it John McDonald? And he was talking about Cali Thistle, and he said, look, the dream is to play at the top flight, it's to play European football, it's to win the Scottish Cup. And within a quarter of a century, Cali Thistle had done all those things. So there's nothing. There's nothing wrong with having these dreams.
No,
but you have to have the right people, both behind the scenes, in the manager's office, and on the park. But it has to be done in a way that is manageable and is sustainable. And I think the people at the club have got the necessary talents and the drive, the ambition, the expertise in various areas
You've got to
Yeah,
imagine.
Sorry, it sounds like that. Sorry, Russ, on you go, buddy.
No.
I was just going to say, it sounds like there's plenty of kind of reasons to do it slowly, you know, because you look at Gretna, as you just said there, and there's obvious overspending at Rangers, and Dundee problems, Mull had problems, and you go, well, there's obviously they've learned from mistakes from other clubs, so these guys are probably very high level at in their trade, their Monday to Friday jobs. So these guys aren't daft, you know, and so these guys are doing it the right way. And I think part time isn't that uncommon in the Championship. As I know a couple of teams that's part time still in there.
Yeah, well, our Arbroath obviously were just became kind of second favourite team last year, and they've done it. I mean, definitely there've been a number of teams who have been up there in part time, and I mean, there are stages where you kind of feel. I mean, you look at the full time teams that have been operating in League One in recent years. Now that must be a push. That must be really, really tough, because
without that,
you finish fifth in League One, you're getting what, 30 grand worth of prize money. If you're, I don't know, it's certainly not going to be very much. So it's you can understand the real pressure on big teams like Falkirk and Dunfermline.
Great point.
You know, and what they've had to do. So we may be part time. We may only train twice a week, but I mean, these guys are as fit as anyone in the league. You know, we've in St Johnstone in it was a pre-season friendly, but they've come back from a week's training in Spain, and certainly in fitness level matched them to the end. Livingston, but again, fitness, the guys showed up. Now, what these teams have got, and inevitably they've got it because they're top flight teams, they've got that extra bit of quality that right now we don't have. They've got a squad. You know, Jim's still trying to get players in. I mean, we some of the games we've had 3 outfield players on the bench, and you know, you're looking at the other teams who are changing eight or nine during the match. So yes, part time, but it's not a part time mentality. And I mean, I mean, Jim he's a part time manager. He will be doing 24/7.
Absolutely.
You know, and I mean, I've spoken to a few people actually who are involved in the game and who have been involved at different levels, and they've said the same thing to me. That call it part time if you like, but
I watched the interview with Paul Hartley. Did we Open Goal after thinking we're manager of the year or manager of the month?
Yeah,
and he was very much, you know, sort of pushing out the same line as what you are. He was saying, part time and name only, really, because this is absolute, you know, full time sort of responsibilities that I take on. He goes, I embrace it, and he was interesting. He was speaking about the owner's sort of vision, and he was saying very similar that the ambition is there, but everything's been completely balanced and measured in terms of how we'll get to that sort of standard and how do we get to that achievement. And I don't mind that. I think it's responsible for a start. But just very interestingly, Mark picked up, and it just came to me now, right? It's not part of the script, but I've got to ask, Dundee, when they were doing what they were doing and you were covering the SPFL, I find that one of the most fascinating eras, you know, I've ever seen in Scottish football.
During COVID, the whole thing about the boat and the no. All right,
Caniggia joined.
That.
Oh, yeah. Giovanni Di Stefano, and you think
links to the mafia.
Well, not that though. I just like the players coming in. Caniggia was a 33-year-old former Argentine international. I mean, it's like, this is crazy that he's joining the club. Then Ravanelli, you've got
Caballero,
it was
Viali.
That was a crazy time.
It was. My youngest son was born in Dundee. We were in the process of moving down here, and so he's a Dundee fan. So he was just a wee boy at that point. But I remember one night I wasn't working and taking the boys to Broadwood, Dundee, where they were playing Clyde. And from memory, Ravanelli came on as a sub, scored a hat-trick in the space of about 9 minutes.
Wild.
And of course, all he's good. But I do remember sitting in that stand, looking across, going, I just watched Fabrizio Ravanelli score a hat-trick for Dundee against Clyde.
I know it is
is going on? I remember talking to Jim Duffy one time about it, and
Yeah.
I said, what was it like? Obviously, he kind of disappeared, and then you had the Benetti brothers were around at that point as well. But he said, remember? No, was it the Stefano? It was the Stefano, I think it said to him. So he said, Jim, we've... right, this is... It shows you where they were. I mean, just how crazy the whole thing was. He said, look, the next player I want you to sign... he said the next player I want you to sign is I'm going to say Clarence Seedorf, and it wasn't Clarence Seedorf. It was other midfielder, Edgar Davids. I want you to sign Edgar Davids. I went, can't be fucking joking. No, okay. I want you to go across and arrange the transfer of Edgar Davids.
Jesus,
can you imagine? Edgar Davids training in the public park, you know?
But again, though, if you told me Claudio Canica would be joining at 33, he was playing with Maradona in the late 80s, the early 90s for Argentina. I think he made his debut. I don't know how long into the game it was, but it was at Tannadice in the derby, I think, or at Dens Park in the derby, and he just scores a chip for 25 yards. Like, I mean, just a beautiful dink, and you went, this just isn't adding up.
They went to Motherwell. If it wasn't the first game of the season, I think it was the first game of the season, and they won it comfortably, very, very comfortably. And the football that they played that afternoon was absolutely breathtaking. Yep. And you thought, wow, this could be it. But of course, it was never going to be sustained, I suppose. And actually, I mean, you talk about Dundee, the stories at different times that they have produced, and you know, most of them have been heartbreaking, I guess, to the Dundee fans. I mean, you know, you're talking about that period. I'm immediately thinking, well, you're talking about the other episodes. Yeah, I mean, I go all the way back to when Ron Dixon was in charge of Dundee, and there was various things going on at that point as well. And I'm sure Jim Traynor and Spency both had their bank accounts frozen by Ron Dixon as he looked to take legal action against things that were said in the programme.
Wow.
What's that, 26, 27 years, 25 years ago? So, I mean, Dundee have and right the way through to, well, the lockdown, the missing vote, and...
They've been a good part of the cast, Richard. They have been a very good part of the cast of the soap opera that is Scottish football.
Yeah, I agree.
They've been by no means the supporting cast either.
No.
Right up there at times. I mean,
they don't try to get a game against Celtic played in San Francisco maybe a couple of years ago. They always seem to be doing bizarre things, and even the thing with the voting. I think the thing with the vote was kind of perpetrated by a Celtic fan who he pretended to mock up some emails, sending them from, who was the old chairman? Is it Dominic Keane? Dominic Keane supposedly been part of a company that was, and it was a Celtic fan. And seemingly the story goes that part of the dossier of evidence that Rangers did in the show contained some of these emails that this guy had faked, and the guy has get a pass to being an absolute fucking brilliant source of hilarity. You know what I mean? And that was some of the information. If you remember, they were going to display this dossier on a Friday at 12 o'clock, and we're all waiting to be...
The gun it was called or something, the smoking
gun. It was, the whole thing was smoking was their arses, because that's what they were speaking it to. And they were supposed to unveil this information, and we reckon, well, the story goes that a big part of this was these emails from Dominic Keane to a company that was part owned by some chairman of a Dundee, and he's in the club at some capacity, and it was seemingly supposed to be kind of ring fence to help Dundee in years to come, and it looked like a bribe basically, but it was all done by some genius Celtic fan.
I mean, I obviously I don't know anything about any of that side of things, but I mean there were so many different stories doing the rounds at the time. But that period, so when the football was in lockdown, we did 20 Saturday afternoons on a row without a single ball being kicked, and some of those programs were the most memorable
I listened to everyone, every
third,
single
honestly,
one. I was on furlough at that time, so it was just golden for me. It was golden.
I think one of the great things was, well, we're hearing from people who didn't normally have a voice. And, the chairman or people, owners at various clubs, maybe further down the ladder, but who suddenly became very important because they all had a part to play. They all had obviously they all had a vote, but everybody was affected in a different way. And to an extent, everybody was looking out for themselves, and you could understand that, given the hardships that many were facing. But no one could quite work out, right, how's this all going to come together? How's this all going to play? I mean, there was one afternoon, and it was in the way as we were starting to get more and more information about the vote and everything that had gone on there. And Scott Gardner, chief executive at Calais Thistle,
I remember
called in, and I texted Scott earlier in this, like, will you come on? He went, no, I'm not coming on. I said,
remember this.
It'd be really good to have you on. No, I'm not coming on. I'm keeping my powder dry. But he's listened to the first 7 or 8 minutes. He's heard somebody say something, and he couldn't hold himself back. He's straight on the phone, and he kind of just laid it all out minute by minute. Everything
This is
happening,
box
and all
office.
the
He is
different
presenter. This is popcorn. This is what we all see. Rather than going into the nitty gritty of it, I just think, for your point of view, you must just be sitting there going, "Oh, this is just golden!" Like this is
Naples and Mora.
Yeah. Because at times, now just going back to what you said earlier about the mainstream media and how people say, we get the truth from somebody on Twitter. Because a lot of times, somebody they don't have the same constraints on them in terms of what they can say and open themselves up to action. So we need to have things sourced properly. We need to be absolutely sure of what we're putting out. Occasionally, things slip through. That will happen. So at times it can be frustrating because we knew a lot of what was going on at the time, but you needed people to back up. And if folk weren't prepared to do that, I need to, or someone else needs to, if it's challenged, somebody needs to be able to produce the evidence. And unless you can, then, so you're putting yourself in. So when you've got somebody like Scott coming on and just letting it all go, it was phenomenal. And actually I was up in Inverness at the weekend with Cove, and it's been great. And that's one of the things. It's just catching up with people and seeing folks I've not seen for a while. And I went in in Scott's office and just had a catch up with him. And just as I was leaving, he just patted me back and he said, "We'll always have Dundee." Scott, I will never, ever, ever forget that afternoon. It was sensational.
I was listening to that live genuinely at the time because, furlough was a weird thing. I know it can be miserable for a lot of people and that, but I thought the daily output you decided to do at that time, it was daily, remember, it was an hour-long show that was going on, then you had other outlets that were doing sort of almost daily features still, and it kept you going, and then you just got moments of, I'd be sitting there, I don't know, watching some, not watching, playing something in the PlayStation or Championship Manager because I'm a fool, right? Still playing these sort of things, right? With that in the background, and you just like, pause that. What's happening here? And it was literally jaw-dropping, and I thought, that must be, as a broadcaster, just the sort of dream thing. And I don't like going into all the nitty-gritty and the politics behind it all. I just think, for your perspective, you must just go, like that's landed on your feet just unbelievably well.
It was brilliant. You'd all that in the politics and everything else, but what we also did during that period of time was it was a kind of archive slot. So it would be 25 years in Kenrick Larson's time for Celtic. If that had been the milestone, then we get various people on who were involved at the time or who played with them or who managed them. And we did that for all sorts of clubs, for all sorts of big occasions right the way through. And that was brilliant as well. I think from my point of view, nothing sells in football quite like nostalgia. And to be able to, one of the highlights for me was it would have been the 50th anniversary of Aberdeen winning the Scottish Cup, beat Celtic 3-1 in 1970. And to get Joe Harper and Bobby Clark, I think it was just the two of them we had on from that team talking. And certainly Bobby is, he was out in the States for many, many years, the goalie, but he's back home in the Northeast now. Still absolutely sharp as attack. A very, very clever man. A determination not to get beat like few I have known over the years. And to have him talking with such clarity half a century later, and such warmth and affection for teammates and the manager, Eddie Turnbull. So that was a lovely part of that. You know, and these are, it's always easier. And it's always more exciting if you've got the live football. But it just shows that actually, I think the game means so much to so many of us that as long as you've got the right people there and you've got the right material, then you can talk for hours about football, as we've done.
That's what we said before. Like, me and Russell spoke about this before, and football is probably the only thing that a 5-year-old boy and a 65-year-old woman can come together for. You know what I mean? It just connects people. And just touching on what you said about the behind the scenes and the phone calls and emails for the Dundee saga, the voting and things like that. And it cast my mind back to, you remember when Chick Young and Jim Traynor had a bit of a Barney live on air, and it was about the vote for Rangers. No, before the story, it was about Rangers going to administration, and it was kind of like going about the press that Rangers might be in trouble. And I think Chick Young was backing this story up, but Jim Traynor was kind of poo-pooing this idea, and he must have been sitting there as a journalist, kind of knowing these rumours were going about. But as you said, you had to have enough sources to back it up. You had to kind of keep quiet about it. But I remember that spat. I think it's online somewhere. You can listen to it again. And
the joys of YouTube. The joys
of YouTube. You can't hide it. By saying, you must have been sitting listening to that. You're probably hosting the show and thinking, I know Chick Young's right here, but I can't actually say anything.
I mean, there are certainly Chick and Jim. There were times where I would just sit back. I'll just
Aye.
Is there at times you've got to worry though about whether they're crossing that line of, is this actually good allowed to be on air?
Aye, I mean, I have to trust both of them. Both are longer in the tooth than I am, and more experienced journalists. So I have to trust that they are not going to say anything that they shouldn't say, or won't say anything that they can't back up. But I always have to, I suppose in my role, I was the safety net. So if I'm not just talking about Chick and Jim, but if at any time, anything is said, any aspersions are cast, I have to be the one who says, look, we need, that is not the opinion of the BBC, or I would clarify something, or if what exactly did he say that right? I need to know exactly what you're saying there. I mean, kind of in that situation at times, but I mean, those two, they used to. There was a spell when we've done various things at the tail end of the programme, and there was a spell when we did a head-to-head with Chick Young and Jim Traynor. So there would be 3 topics of the week, and they would essentially butt horns over each of the topics.
That's superb.
But it got to the point where it was like, so, Chick was saying, well, what do you think about that? He went, well, I think this. He went, okay, I'll think something else then. So, I mean, it was pure theatre at showbiz at times, if you like, almost. But what was so funny? Well, what was so funny was the fact that Chick, whether he believed in something or not, would actually put up the argument just because he enjoyed arguing with Jim, I think. And it was
the sky is blue.
Yeah, some of the best ones where they both actually thought the same thing, but Chick just decided to take the contrary viewpoint, and he would just keep battering. I mean, there were big characters, I guess. Not just those two, but I've worked with over the years, and there have certainly been moments where it's gone over the top. And I think there are certain individuals who would agree that probably they've said things, and it has got a bit too personal. And I don't like that. I mean, there's no need for that, because it shouldn't tip into that. It has done on occasion. I mean, not very often, but on occasion. But I've got to say that mostly, I repeat, Everybody I work with, go on, fine. You come off here.
You've all got the same goal at the end of the day. You
Aye,
want to put out
exactly.
the best sort of possible product you can.
Yeah.
You want to be
Yeah.
top of the pop still on that Saturday afternoon. You don't want your competition, outscoring you or whatever. You want to be the best. I'm sure that still comes into it. Of course it does. So you're all essentially going for the same goal. We will wind it up because we've took way much more of your time than we expected, right? But we are going to finish with a wee bit of fun, right? And you have got the option to pass, right? So this is called 10 seconds. So within 10 seconds, you give us a one-word answer. It's not as bad as you think, don't worry.
Right.
So just your honest opinion, 10-second questions, and we will start with favourite ground in the SPFL for the atmosphere.
Tynecastle.
We knew you were going to say that. We knew. Who was the hardest manager or player to interview?
Oh, gee. Who could be was Bobby Williamson.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And purely because he's just a git. He just, I mean, I got on, I think I got on really well with Bobby, but he just loved to wind you up. And honestly, he would, some of the answers he would give you, while with a little glint in his eye. But Bobby wasn't, back in the day, Bobby gave me some bottom clenching moments, I have to say.
He's quite pan-faced, isn't he?
Aye, very much.
I like that. So, obviously, you'd spoken about the Stuart Gardner thing, which is brilliant. Is there any other sort of box office press conference that you've either covered or attended that comes to mind that was, you went, wow, that is absolute gold?
I tell you one that always has stuck in my mind. And one of the reasons why I came back was that somebody unearthed some old photographs. But it was during the whole Celtic takeover, and it was Fergus McCann, it was Brian Dempsey, and the character was Matt McGlone, who was involved with Celtic Change at the time. What I vividly remember was that day. I mean, I was there constantly because I was doing more reporting at the time. But the day that it actually, eventually late at night, that everything was announced and everything changed, but standing out with there was an old BBC light blue, dark blue jacket with a hood up, and the old Ewer reel-to-reel tape recorder that we had. But in the pouring rain, just waiting and waiting all day long for it to happen. And then that moment when Brian Dempsey stepped out at the top of the stairs, the Rebels have won. Another part of it. And then going into the water. That's right. And then there was the news conference inside, and just absolutely packed inside. And Brian and Fergus sitting at the table there, and just it was remarkable. And I don't know. I mean, I remember one of the stories at the time was Celtic were half an hour, 45 minutes away from going bust. But there was so much going on that day in particular. There were so many stories, and there were so many Celtic fans who were there outside the stadium, and you could see what it meant to each and every one of them. When you think of what then happened at that club and the transformation and the changes to the stadium and the mentality, I suppose, and we talked about Seville, none of that would have been possible, I guess.
It goes back to that moment, doesn't it?
Really? Yeah, so I mean, it was a moment in time. So, what was that, 94? I mean,
94,
a long time ago. But it that day kind of remains etched in the memory.
Best player you've seen in the SPFL?
The best player.
Other than Duncan Shearer.
I mean, in my time in broadcasting, I think, well, you mentioned already Henrik Larsson, Brian Laudrup. Yeah, could do things that I'd never seen anyone do in Scottish football before. But I mean, I think those two would be right at the top. But there are lots of players. I mentioned Tom Rogic earlier on. There are lots of players that I've just personally there's something about them And I think as fans, whether they play for your team or not, yeah, you kind of buy into them. Well, absolutely, I would say that. I mean, and there's also that side of it that you get to know guys, so you kind of feel towards them. I remember over many years, loads of times I've been asked, right, do your best ever Aberdeen 11, and inevitably the Gothenburg players populated that team. It was difficult for very many. I mean, certainly, and I've done various versions of it because I need to try to do something a wee bit different. And Joe Harper certainly has absolutely been in the team because he was my first hero, the goal scorer, and one or two others. But I remember. So it was. It must have been the time that Gothenburg came out, or I'm sure it was that one. It was for the record, and right there, back page piece on the pull out your favourite Aberdeen 11. So I'd chosen the team. And instead of putting Stuart Kennedy at right back, I had put Henning Bol, who was the Danish right back of the first Aberdeen team I'd ever watched. And there was something, I mean, there had been a few Scandinavians coming to Aberdeen in the late 60s, but when I started watching Aberdeen, he was the only one. And it was so rare back in those days to have a foreign player on your team. So I put Henning Bol on the team. And as it happened, I was working up the Tawdry that afternoon, and I was driving up the road, and John McMaster phoned me, and I answered. John, how you doing? You're in trouble. What do you mean? Oh my God! Wait until Kennedy gets a hold of you. What are you talking about? He went. I said, you're not talking about the piece in the paper. I went, he is absolutely raging. Absolutely raging. I went, oh, God. So anyway, get to Tawdry, and I'd gone to the ticket office, and I think I must have gone round to speak to somebody because I was walking back round the other side, the corner, walking towards me, John McMaster and Stuart Kennedy. Now, John was doing scouting at the time, and Stuart must have been doing a bit of that as well. And honestly, Kennedy just makes a beeline for straight up to me. Henning Bol. Henning fucking Bol. Henning fucking Bol. Come on. Honestly. I mean, you talk about characters and people who have
I love it.
Just this driven mentality. Stuart is right at the top of the list. Incredible. And he never let me forget. Every time I've done anything, seen him since. Henning Bol. Henning fucking.
He always reminds you of it.
It's amazing. So can I learn my lesson never to put Henning
So
Bol?
it's Henrik Larsson, Brian Laudrup, and Henning Bol.
Yeah.
That's the top three.
Henning Bol. Let's put Henning Bol in there.
Henning Bol.
I mean, back when it was a really struggling Aberdeen. Stevie Tosh, for some reason, Aberdeen Stevie Tosh, and he was there Aberdeen for 18 months. Great guy. Ended up, he went to Gretna. There you go, Gretna. Who gave him like a 3-year contract and twice the wages, I think, that he was on.
Helped get Livingston promoted as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, I know. He had a great career, Stevie, but he was a player that for some reason I loved watching Stevie Tosh. And it was about attitude, but he had a bit of skill. I remember he scored a really, really good goal at Ibrox one day. There was something about Stevie that I just bought into. So, I mean, there are loads of players, and actually probably at different teams over the years. Always like David Fernandez. I loved watching David Fernandez at Livingston United and that spell at Celtic as well. There was something about Fernandez that I really enjoyed. So, I mean, if I was to sit down and go back through it, come up with loads of names, I guess. But it's just, I like the people who play football the right way. And now that might be that you're a hugely skillful player and you're a great goal scorer, but it could be that you're an unfussy midfielder who just actually gets on with it, who makes the passes, who keeps possession for your team. I think top class players come in so many different categories, and they may. I'm not talking about very top of the tree, but there is something about these, and you just know the importance of these guys to the team that you're watching. So and it's something that will never leave me. I don't think. I love watching football. I mean, I was with Cove up in Inverness at the weekend there. And Dodgy's got a really good squad at Calais Thistle this season. I mean, there's a bit of experience there, but he's got a lot of. They've got. There must be 7 or 8 of the academy, the kids who have come up through the academy, and they're now making a real impact. You've got Daniel Mackay down here; he's back up on loan. Roddy McGregor, he looks like he's a player. Scott Allardyce, who was at United, very impressive midfielder. And I was watching some of those, and it just, McGregor in particular caught my eye. I thought, it's just great. There's a kid who looks like he's got all the ability. And I think back to the Cali Thistle team with Graham Shinney and with Ryan Christie. And I remember watching them and thinking, these are special kids. You know, these are special guys. And Ryan Christie was, for me,
he had them playing the right way as well, didn't he?
I love watching Ryan. And the two spells he had on loan, I know Aberdeen were so desperate to kind of get him, and we're very close to getting him permanently, and then things changed. And obviously, I mean, his career went. I mean, it was that cup semi-final against Hearts at Murrayfield. Yeah,
that goal changed his career, I think.
And
did he?
I love watching Ryan. He scored probably. I mean, a totally different type of goal. But I mean, the best goal I've ever seen in the flesh was Zidane in the Champions League final against Bayer Leverkusen at hand. It was just mind-blowing. But Ryan scored quite possibly my next most favourite goal I've seen, which it was the infamous night Aberdeen beat Motherwell 7-2. Mark McGee had his moment in the stand with one of the Aberdeen fans.
That was popcorn as well.
Ryan scored just a nonchalant flick with the outside of his foot from the edge of the box up and over and into the top. And I just remember sitting going, how on earth did you do that? Just great. And you know what? A great kid as well. Just I'm so pleased for him that he's gone on and had the career that he's had. He's still, so it's lovely. Yeah, it's lovely seeing those players when they're young and watching them progress and go on, up through the levels. And I think Ryan, he's done that. Shinney absolutely did that. Think of Andy Robertson. You get players where every level they're playing at, they step up and actually they get better. And he did that. Queen's Park, Dundee United, Hull City, Liverpool, Scotland. So it just, I mean, there are so many things about the game that just, I think will always just suck me in.
That's very good. Let's do it.
I don't mind. I know. I keep trying. It's not that I'm avoiding the question. I'm just.
No.
I suppose my love for the game in general, rather than
that's fair.
Necessarily individual.
See, in your job though, you must have covered a lot of national team, obviously games as well, right? First, highest moment you can think of, and lowest moment covering the national team.
Oh, the lowest moment was. Well, there have been a few. I think the real kick in the guts was Italy at Hampden.
I'm so glad you said that.
At the end of the campaign, I just, what they did, the results they had in that campaign, and that was the loss to Georgia, wasn't it? That was what kind of threw it. But that
we really reconnected as well. That campaign, I felt that was when Walter Smith's team, he did get the fans re-engaged again with the national team after a lull, and it felt like they were relatable all over. I just loved that team. I did. I think
it was an early. Was it 6 o'clock? It was an early evening kick-off. I remember driving across mid-afternoon, or early afternoon, probably at Hampden, and it was pouring with rain. But hours beforehand, there were fans. It was heaving, and just the sense of anticipation. And then, of course, they score early, and then we get back to level. Oh yeah,
real optimism ahead of the game. I felt it was real belief.
And then the free kick at the end, and then just driving home afterwards. That was a sore one. I think most recently it was actually that it was Serbia, and it was getting back to, I wasn't there in the studio, but getting actually back to the finals. I mean, back in the day, I was, as a fan, obviously I saw all the qualifications through the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. I just had started at the BBC for Euro 92. So I was in the studio and covered those games from the studio. By 94, Scotland didn't qualify, obviously. Right. But because Scotland always qualified, there was a budget there that wasn't going to be used. So they thought, well, there's no reason why we shouldn't have some kind of presence. I got sent off to the World Cup finals for 2.5 weeks in 94.
Did only an excuse not even get over there? I'm sure he did some.
Oh, maybe only an excuse.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Aye.
In Euro '92.
No, in '94 at the World Cup. Because I always wondered
probably.
why was he? Because I always thought that must have been quite an expensive budget. So that's what it was. The budget had been set aside because we always qualified.
I mean, the use of fraction of it, I would imagine, but I was just there myself, and I covered the 3 Republic of Ireland games, and basically I interviewed anyone who had any connection to Scottish football. So the Dutch were in that the group. So I interviewed Theo Snelders, who was there, Hans Hielhuis, I think, Tommy Coyne. I don't think I actually Tommy Coyne didn't do media at the time. Owen Coyle was there. Pat Bonner was there. And then you just covered what was happening in the tournament. So so I did that, and then Euro '96. I mean, again, Wembley. That was
huge,
soul destroying. Because you kind of felt that there was a chance then. And then of course France '98, and then back nothing for all those years.
Sure.
Probably the highlight.
Sorry, there you go. Carry on.
I was going to say the highlight was the Stade de France opening game of the World Cup. Scotland are playing Brazil. I mean, just as a kid, Brazil was the first national team I was aware of, and Pele and winning the '70 World Cup. Albeit I wasn't as engaged then as I was with '74. But to be sitting inside that stadium, watching Scotland take on Brazil, and actually, okay, I mean, gosh, when Jim Leighton had to pull off a few saves, but to get back on level terms and go, oh my God, what's going on here? This is just mental. But what folks didn't realise was that I'd spent the previous 24 hours sitting inside that stadium trying to convince France Telecom engineer to actually activate the lines, because we had quite a big presence. But back in those days, radio and TV were separate, and there was only a couple of us really there for radio, and I was kind of doing 2 separate, shortish daily programs, doing all the press conferences, doing the proper programs, covering the games and stuff. But because everybody was kind of focused on telly, and it was a huge deal for telly, obviously. But I'd gone you go the day before, just check, make sure that the ISDN lines, they would have been in those days. Just make sure it's there. And I find my point. I find the commentary position where we're sitting. There's nothing there. And I went to speak to the engineer, and of course he's still worried about me because he's got 746 other broadcast points that he's trying to activate. But everything around us seems to be working, and mine isn't. And so in the end,
panic stations as well, eh?
I wore him down. I followed him for 5 hours.
Love it. I love that.
Just up and down the stand. I'm still here. I'm still here. I
ain't going anywhere.
And then eventually went, oh, mon Dieu. Literally, it took 15 seconds. And he went, okay.
Was it difficult?
Shows you the wee small stories, eh? Wee small stories about how things nearly didn't happen for you. I was going to ask you, see when you were talking about Pat Bonner there a minute ago, can you imagine taking Pat Bonner to Croatia versus Russia, trying to pronounce their names? Because I listen to Sportsound, and even Pat Bonner trying to say Davy Weir sometimes sounds hysterical.
I don't know how many times we've said to Pat, and we've mentioned him a few times during this chat, it's Tom Rogic. It's not Tom Rogic.
I know.
Pat, throughout Tom's career with Celtic, Pat
9 years.
Tom Rogic. Rogic. I was it, and then he would say, "Oh yeah." And then you know what? You're just as well.
What's the Conquest happening, isn't
it? We don't employ these guys necessarily to correctly pronounce people's. You kind of hope that'll happen, to correctly pronounce people's names, or to have absolutely spot on command of the English language. It's their expertise in the game, and
of course, of course.
So I think we can forgive them the odd thing.
I mean, it's funny, but Richard, some of it is hilarious.
Is that? No, I would say, I mean, when Pat, gosh, that's quite a while now. Pat's been working on this, but he's, initially I think he would be the first to admit he did have issues with other teams. He knew the Celtic players inside out, but he hadn't seen an awful lot of quite a few of the other teams because he hadn't really been. He's been busy. He was involved in the Irish national teams. Obviously, been doing stuff for FIFA, UEFA as well. I think.
Yep.
So he wasn't around, but he became more available. But he was around, and very quickly he got to know the other teams, the other players. I've got to say, I love working with. Some of my favourite programmes have been with him and Willie Miller because we've got, I think, a really good mix of guys, and there's lots of others I could mention. But just in terms of how two pundits engage and kind of mesh together, I love listening to them. The problem is they both could talk for hours and you're never going to get a short answer for Pat in particular.
No.
I've interrupted him more than anyone else, just because I need to get somebody else speaking here. So but there are times, when the two of them they bounce off each other, and I have literally seen me sit back for 5 or 6 minutes. And there's no point. There's no point in me saying something just for the sake of interrupting this, or for the sake of because I'm loving listening to what these guys are saying. They know the game inside out. And if I'm loving it, listening, surely the other football fans are feel the same way. So just let them. So, I'll still have the opportunity to work with these guys. To an extent, I'll miss that kind of thing. But I will still listen in, and I'll still, as I say, still hopefully be part of the programmes. And I look forward to interrupting Pat Bonner many times.
Right, this has been amazing. Thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it, mate. This has been class. Mark, anything to add, mate? That was brilliant. He was top class. That was top class, Richard. Really appreciate it. Is it something that you would do again? Is this something you quite enjoyed?
I've done quite a few of these.
All right.
And it is something. Well, just in the sense that I think the nice thing is that they've all been very different. You got the ones that are very much Aberdeen. I've done for one of the other clubs, just general football ones. But what's lovely is that it kind of sparks memories. I've spoken about all sorts of things on here today that I don't think I've spoken about in years because you forget. And it's down to just how the chat goes and what the questions are. And, things just suddenly spring up from the recesses of your mind. So no, it's been great fun. Really, really enjoyed it. And good luck with the podcast and for the season ahead.
Thank you. And same to you at Cove. And look forward to listening to you on a Sunday and open all mics. The two of us quite enjoy that, these shows. And thanks again, because it's been a class act listening to you.
Not at all. Absolute pleasure, guys. All the best.
Richard Jordan, what a legend. Cheers.